and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner here in Baltimore. Good to have you with us. And that open and close we all just witnessed once again from last night's State of the Union speech. Those bookends tell us all we need to know in some ways about the depth of the divide in our country than any of the exaggerations, lies, myths trumpeted by Trump last night in his speech. He lied about the economy under Obama and exaggerated what he did. He trumpeted defending those with pre-existing conditions while letting his colleagues cut the ACA, lied about jobs, used people of color to hide his racism, but showed the huckster showman par excellence that he really is, throwing red meat to his base, which seems much more unified than those who oppose him. And the rightward shift of this nation is also happening. What do we walk away with? And how do we analyze, perceive, and make connections between his speech, the polls showing his support growing, the Iowa meltdown, and the Democrats infighting? Well, let's see what the nation's national correspondent has to say. John Nichols, welcome. Good to have you back with us once again.
Great to be with you.
So that was my quick takeaway. Give us your quick takeaway.
Well, I think there's a reason you invite me on. We tend to agree on. Look, my quick takeaway is that Trump did a very politically smart speech.
Yeah.
He was speaking to the United States Senate and the House at a moment between the obvious House's impeachment of him and what will, in short order, be the Senate's acquittal of him. He could have talked about impeachment at great length. He could have made apologies for errors. He could have, fought it out and been as belligerent as ever. Instead, he essentially put his impeachment aside and gave a 2020 reelection campaign speech. And I've seen many State of the Union addresses, Mark, as have you. But the vital thing to understand here is this guy really went all in on making this a reelection speech, up to the point where, you literally heard calls of 4 more years. And so this is telling us a lot about where Donald Trump is at, what he intends to do. And we should listen to that. We should understand that at the heart of where he is at and what he intends to do is to run a aggressive reelection campaign that seeks, frankly, a big win. And that's, if you listen to this speech and, all the reference points he was touching, all the things he was trying to do, he is remarkably enough, clearly presuming that he might be able to score a significant victory.
I mean, clearly he thinks that. He thinks he's going to have a huge victory. But let's talk about some of the things he made basis on from last night's speech. This is a brief montage on what he said about the economy.
In just 3 short years, we have shattered the mentality of American decline, and we have rejected the downsizing of Americans' destiny. We're moving forward at a pace that was unimaginable just a short time ago, and we are never, ever going back. Since my election, we have created 7 million new jobs, 5 million more than government experts projected during the previous administration. The unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans has reached the lowest levels in history. In 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce.
So let me ask you a question here, John, about this. I mean, how do you cut through all the lies and obfuscations that clearly came out of the speech last night? I mean, muddling the facts, that the people out of the workforce and not acknowledging any of the realities of the economic conditions in America. Yes, the economy is strong, but for who? I mean, so how do you counteract that?
Well, I mean, the best way to do it is to not get mired in the detail, right? Because that's what he wants you to do. He wants to have a debate about whether 3.5 went this way or 3.8 went that way. That won't be heard. And So what you really need to do is kind of jump ahead of it and say to people, do you really feel great? Do you feel like everything's as it should be? Now, the interesting thing is polling tells us, even now, after a sustained recovery that began under Barack Obama, that people don't feel that great, that there actually is a great deal of tension and concern and discomfort in America. And much of it is rooted in economics. And so my argument is that Trump always runs against Obama, unless he's running against Hillary Clinton. So his campaign is always about the past. The smart move for him is to run toward the future and to say, are you comfortable now? Do you really think things are going to get better? And if they don't, which you're going to find a tremendous number of people are in that place, especially, frankly, older workers, then you need to have an agenda that talks about how you will make it better. And the other thing I would do as well, or at least keep conscious of, is that Donald Trump doesn't like to acknowledge one of the painful realities across this country, but especially in the upper Midwest. He promised them their factories wouldn't close. In fact, the factories would reopen. The truth of the matter is, in places like Lordstown, Ohio, and a lot of other cities across these key voting states, you can actually show the video of the factories closing under his president. So I think you don't get into his debate. You actually have your own debate. And that's far more effective because if you're in his debate, he is remarkably skilled at making a lot of people fall for his lies.
So, John, the other piece here I think that's important, his attack in this election came out last night as well, was around socialism in Venezuela. Just watch this quick clip and let's just kind of dive into this together.
Socialism destroys nations, but always remember freedom unifies the soul. We are supporting the hopes of Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to restore democracy. The United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your homeland. Please take this message back that all Americans are united with the Venezuelan people in their righteous struggle for freedom.
So 2 takeaways here, John. A, this clearly is he's going to attack socialism, whether Bernie Sanders is the candidate or whoever's the candidate. And B, what hit me about what happened last night was how everybody, not everybody, most everybody, Nancy Pelosi and the rest rose up to cheer Guaido.
Yeah, I mean, let's go to the core of this.
Yeah.
Donald Trump isn't particularly concerned about Venezuela.
No.
And frankly, what he's trying to do here is to take democratic socialism as practiced in, just terrifying places like Norway, and equate it with other countries, many of which have challenges that are economic and social and structural. The problem with it is one that we've got to go to the core of, and that is, what are democratic socialists in the United States proposing? What they are proposing is, someplace along the lines, by and large, I wouldn't speak for everybody, obviously, but by and large, along the lines of Denmark or Norway or Scandinavian countries, or even countries that aren't always identified as social democratic, Germany, United Kingdom, Canada. They're talking about a national health care program. They're talking about free or very affordable education. They're talking about addressing transportation and housing issues. This is part of a global democratic socialist vision. It's not particularly radical. In fact, people that Donald Trump meets with, people that he even works with on a regular basis, are democratic socialists, or at least people who govern in countries where democratic socialists are a part of the government. And so we see a real telegraphing of what Donald Trump's approach will be. It will be dishonest, and it will seek to take complex issues and reduce them to simple one-liners. It's interesting to me as somebody who, I guess at this point, I'm a pretty serious Trump, listener or viewer. I've watched him do this for a long time. Usually, when he is in that sort of section of the speech, it's really just, kind of cheerleading. This wasn't the case. Here he had carefully crafted lines. Socialism divides countries. Whatever his next part of it was, unites the soul, right? And that here he really was trying to be rhetorically effective, and also trying to deliver a lot of messages. What I take away from that is that the president and his campaign really is determined to make this a very central part of what they do. And that determination is interesting because if they knew, for instance, they'd be running against Bernie Sanders, who is a democratic socialist, it would actually, it would make at least a certain amount of political strategy sense. But there's a very good chance they could be running against any number of candidates. It is clear that the desire is to paint the Democratic Party in the United States, which is not a democratic socialist party.
Far from
it. Far from it. To paint that party with a broad brush. What Democrats need to do is to get a lot smarter about talking about this. And I promise you that if they run away from it and just say, oh, none of us are democratic socialists, none of us believe this, that's not who we are, they will play right into Trump's hand. What they would be far wiser to do is to say that while they may not be a democratic socialist party, that history shows going back more than a century that in this United States of America, we have elected socialist mayors and members of Congress, and these people have governed very effectively, and they have worked over the years with Democratic and Republican administration. And to kind of, I guess it requires a little bit of history here and a comfort level rather than simply playing into Trump's hands by being afraid of the mention of the word.
Though I think some of the fear people have, we don't have time to do this today completely, John. It'd be great to have this discussion, though, about, I think most Americans embrace principles that are in fact socialist, but despise the notion of socialism. I think...
Polling shows that they don't even despise it as much as they did, say, a few decades ago. The word is actually significantly more popular in many surveys. But the thing about socialism, or democratic socialism, especially in this context, is that because it hasn't been well-defined and well-discussed in America for a very long time, there's a bit of a void there. The president is trying to fill that void with his definition, with his language. Democrats will not serve themselves well if their effort to fill the void is simply to say, yeah, Donald Trump is right. This is really scary.
Well,
that benefits him. His explanation and some history actually might make for a better discourse, and it might actually be beneficial for the Democrats to be. They don't have to say that they're democratic socialists, but what they should say is, we have to understand the history of this country and understand that democratic socialists and socialist traditions are very much a part of that history. It's not something foreign. So
let's just take a quick look at this, and then as we conclude, this is and kind of wrap out where the Democrats might be going. One of the things Trump loves to do is he tries to kind of bring black folks and people of color into his sphere. When his history of birthism, with Obama, what he said about happening in Charlottesville, equivocation between white nationalists and folks who are on the ground, calling other countries shithole countries, the Central Park Five, what he did there, his deeds in housing discrimination all his life. Yet what he does is this.
Opportunity zones are helping Americans like Army veteran Tony Rankins from Cincinnati, Ohio. After struggling with drug addiction, Tony lost his job, his house, and his family. He was homeless. But then Tony found a construction company that invests in opportunity zones. He is now a top tradesman, drug-free, reunited with his family, and he is here tonight. Tony, keep up the great work, Tony. In the gallery tonight, we have a young gentleman, and what he wants so badly, 13 years old, Ian Lawnfay. He's an 8th grader from Arizona. Ian has always dreamed of going to space. He was the first in his class and among the youngest at an aviation academy. He aspires to go to the Air Force Academy, and then he has his eye on the Space Force. Sitting behind Ian tonight is his greatest hero of them all. Charles McGee was born in Cleveland, Ohio, 1 century ago. Charles is one of the last surviving Tuskegee Airmen, the first black fighter pilots, and he also happens to be Ian's great-grandfather. Janiyah Davis, a 4th grader from Philadelphia. Janiyah. Janiyah's mom, Stephanie, is a single parent. She would do anything to give her daughter a better future. But last year, that future was put further out of reach when Pennsylvania's governor vetoed legislation to expand school choice to 50,000 children.
Let's let him kind of trash education budgets, take money away from all this stuff. I mean, that really changes America and goes to the heart of things. But this is what he does. This is part of the strategy, to make kind of people on the right feel really good, and how he can, once again, obfuscate all the kind of reality that was around him.
Sure. Look, this is going to be a major part of Donald Trump's campaign. And it is twofold. Number one, I think he will make a genuine effort, and the Republicans will make a genuine effort to reach out to African-American voters. They've done this in the past. Remember, in some cases, they're not going necessarily for a win, but what they're going for is a higher percentage.
Right.
And that is smart politics. And frankly, some of that presentation last night was done very effectively. And what Democrats ought to do is recognize that. Too often, Democrats go into campaigns assuming that they've got the black vote locked up, that African Americans are going to be their base, and they undoubtedly will be. But Democrats need to reach out to African Americans as well. They need to have strong, clear messages. That's the best way to respond. And again, this is a complicated thing because the president is trying to reduce fundamental big issues down to very simple messages, things like school choice and education budgets. And Democrats have to talk about that rather than talk around it. And one of the ways to do this is to put African-American Democrats and African-American citizens front and forward in their messaging. And if you want to counter a message on school choice, then, put the African-American school board members from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who ran on a message that school choice wasn't working for their community. Put them up front. Don't avoid the issue. Don't dance around it. Go clearly into it and have a real debate. And look, the president is hoping that Democrats will run the same kind of campaigns they've run in the past. That's his calculation, and that he can step into some of that space. If Democrats are smart, they will run a new kind of campaign that has a much more respect for the sophisticated and important role that African Americans have played in the Democratic coalition, now going back to the days of FDR.
So let's conclude with this. I mean, so let's take the point you just made here. When you look at the speech you made last night, when you look at the polls, like the Gallup polls showing his support up to 49%, whatever that is, what the meltdown in Iowa that you wrote about for The Nation magazine, the Democrats infighting at the moment, the acquittal coming tomorrow, and the battle between the DNC and progressives and others inside the Democratic Party. I mean, this seems, and maybe again I'm being jaundiced and maybe being too negative here, John. And you'll bring me the positive poll, I think. But so how does this weigh out come November? This doesn't look good at the moment.
Sure. I mean, it does look a little complicated at the moment. I think often because of self-inflicted wounds on the part of the Democrats, the Iowa caucus fiasco is something that I'm quite sure the president will reference frequently as you go forward. In many ways, the president's trying to make himself a commentator on the Democratic contest,
Right.
Weighing in on who's up, who's down, who he likes, who he doesn't like, blah, blah, blah. But I will offer you probably the most positive take of all here, and that we live in a moment in history where we move from topic to topic, from idea to idea at an exponential rate. And I can tell you that the president's State of the Union address will not be remembered by many people in a week. And it's possible that a lot of other things that happened this week won't be remembered next week. Not because people don't have memory, but because our media system moves so aggressively, so bluntly on topic that there's not a lot of continuity. In this moment, if you're going to run against Donald Trump, the strategy has to be to work as hard as he does to define the moment you're in. Right? To constantly be defining it and to define it forward. And so I don't necessarily think that what you're looking at right now has a great deal of consequence for November of 2020. The only way that what's happening right now is definitional for November of 2020 is if the opposition to the president kind of lives in this moment. And if they keep worrying about, what's happening right here, right now. No, they have to define forward. And the way to define forward is to talk about economic and social and racial justice as something that we can achieve in this country, to talk about saving the planet, to talk about peace. And I will tell you, I was in Iowa watching Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez do that on stages across Iowa, and I saw her electrifying groups of people from many, many different backgrounds. And I just want to emphasize, I'm not saying Ocasio-Cortez is perfect or she's the only one, but I will tell you is she has a very optimistic message of hope for where we might get next as a country. I heard Ilhan Omar from Minnesota speaking in a similar way, very, very effectively. And it's time for the Democratic Party, no matter who they nominate for president, to look a lot more seriously at the optimists in their ranks, at the people who really do believe we're at a critical moment in our history, and that there are going to be two definitions of the future, or two, visions of the future going forward. One is Trump's vision. He's going to try and make it a little less frightening. He's going to try and soften some of the edges. But it's still going to be Trump's vision, and it's going to have all the worst elements buried within it. And the other ought to be a huge, bold, strong vision for how this country addresses a climate crisis, automation changes, the fundamental shifts that are going on in our society. And the way you do that is not by going back to old talking points. It's developing new talking points rooted in old values. And I think, frankly, there's a tremendous amount of space to do that between now, which I will remind you is February, and November, which is a very different part of the year.
It certainly is. And I think you're right, John. I mean, if we can find a way to celebrate our heterogeneity, celebrate who we are, and celebrate the possibilities of what we can do, that can make all the difference in the next months ahead, leading to November. John Nichols, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for your writing and your work. Look forward to talking to you again as soon as we can.
I appreciate it, my friend. A pleasure to be with you.
Have a good time in New Hampshire.
I'll do my best.
And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Thank you all for joining us. Let us know what you think. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.